So there are more new people, and I know why you're here, but it is good to me to say this, the nature of the text that we are reading, and also the nice weather outside. Combination of all those things, you are very welcome to stay if you want to stay. Otherwise, when you feel it is too tough to stay here and to go through these, this text, and then too difficult to miss, the nice weather outside there. If you feel very difficult after the first session, I'm very, very happy if you leave. I'm get used to that, and also, in that case, I'm a very compassionate person. So, I just warn you that. So, it is, yeah. So we will have 4 sessions, two sessions in the morning with a break between, and the 2 sessions after the lunch, again with a break between. So there are 4 sessions, and this session will last a little bit longer than an hour, about actually an hour and a half, but that is, because we will, first part of this session, we'll spend the time setting our intention to join the class, and read a few texts, short texts, and then then start the class itself. So class itself may last an hour after all those preparations. So then, the rest of the sessions, all the sessions will last about an hour. So, mainly because I need to finish this text, so at least the first 3 sessions, first two sessions in the morning, and the first session in the afternoon, mainly I'm going to read the text because I need to cover this text. And then if there are questions, I may take, a few questions at the last session, which, starting from 3:30, and then we'll conclude the day with some short recitation. So those people who are new for this class, that is the usual our structure of the day. Oh yeah. So the first is setting our intention, a positive, a constructive intention to join the class. That is useful, regardless of whether we are able to follow the text or not. It is useful and helpful to set our intention, a positive, a constructive intention. And in that case, the first thing that we are going to do is in the prayer book. In the prayer book that we are going to read, page 5, those verses, prayers in Shakyamuni Buddha, those verses. And these, while we are reading these verses, most of you know, these verses help us, particularly people who are already following the teachings of the Buddha, to help us to hold, to experience 3 very helpful, useful, the minds. The first one is the mind, mind thinking the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. As a follower of the teachings of the Buddha, the recalling, remembering, thinking these 3 jewels at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of an event, or in fact and every now and then during the day and during the night is extremely helpful and useful. So these verses, first few verses, help us to do that. And then next 1 or 2 verses help us to hold another very useful, helpful mental states. That is the mind, the thinking, recalling, remembering the essence of the teachings of the Buddha. People who follow the teachings of the Buddha, the recalling the essence of the teachings of the Buddha every now and then in our daily lives is very crucial and very important. And that is, at least, intentionally, deliberately not cause pains and difficulties to other living beings. Their mind, their body, and their environment where they live. And that's the minimum. And if it is possible, very intentionally and very deliberately engage in activities that supports their well-beings of the all living creatures. That includes the environment where they live. And that is the essence of the teachings of the Buddha. And as followers of the teachings of the Buddha, remembering that oneself as following that teaching, and to try to live one's own life in that manner, in that nature, then that is the second important things to be recollected, recalled as a follower of the teachings of the Buddha. And the third important point to be recollected by reading these verses, that is the last few verses, that is the recollecting, remembering, seeing, thinking the nature of impermanence of all the things and events, including one's own, this life, and the possessions, status, relations, everything, including Buddha himself stated many occasions, saying the teachings, the teachings of the Buddha will also going to disappear. So because of the nature of the impermanence, so remembering that nature, that reality, the nature of impermanence, which is happening within us, around us, all the time. Occasionally, we may able to realize, we may able to see, experience, but most of the time we are completely, what we ignored, or we just, try to push away in our mental states, in our thinking process. And the historical Buddha told his, explained to his followers, the remembering that nature every now and then is extremely important, useful. And reading these verses, help us to recall these 3 important points. So we will do that with the strong and clearly imagining, the historical Buddha. Gautama is present in front of us, where the Buddha statue is, not in a form of statue or in a painting, but as a real person with all the great qualities, particularly his fully cultivated, developed loving kindness, great compassion towards all living creatures, and also his fully cultivated, developed great wisdom. So have that kind of strong feelings, the strong, the imagination that the historical Buddha is present in front of us. Then if you also like to imagine those other great teachers, past and present, that you have directly or indirectly have received teachings, that will also be very, very helpful. So hold that, the feelings of that mind, the Buddha is present. Now, with that, we'll read Prayers to Shakyamuni Buddha, prayer book, page 7, page 5, sorry, page 5. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the third destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sukada, knower of the world, supreme guide to human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from Shakya Klein, are prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the third destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sukada, knower of the world, supreme guide to human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone, the seven Satya, are prostrate and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the third destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sukada, knower of the world, supreme guide, human being to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from Shakya Klein, are prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O Supreme amongst humans, you are born in this earth, you passed our 7 stripes, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who are wise then, are prostrate. With the pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like golden mountain, fame like blaze in 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you are prostrate. With the supreme signs of the place of super moon, cloud like gold, to you are prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you are prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the founder having all understanding, the field of merit with the qualities like vast ocean, to you the one gone to dustness are prostrate. The purity that frees one's attachment, virtues that free one's lower realms, one path, the supreme purity, the Dharma, the pacified, are prostrate. Those who are liberated, who once chose path to liberation, the holy field qualified realization, who are devoted in moral precepts, to you the Savam community tending virtue are prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Joy, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three endeavor to homage. To all worthy of respect, bow with bodies as many as all realms, atoms in all aspects. With the supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teachings of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of lamp, an illusion, drop of dew and bubble. Flash lightning, a cloud. See conditions, things as such. Through these merits, may sentient beings attain the rank of seeing, subdue the fourth false, and believe the samsara's ocean, perturbed by waves of aging, sickness, and death. Oh, yeah. And next, page 9. The Heart of the Perfection Wisdom Sutra. And reading this sutra is directly related to the topic, the text that we are reading. And the main topic of this text that we are reading is the main topic of this sutra. Although the text that we are reading is written by a 14th century great Tibetan teacher, Geshe, but his main, the subject of that text is the same topic, subject of this Heart Sutra, Perfection of Heart Sutra. So we'll read this sutra, and of course people who are able to contemplate, reflect on emptiness, as the sutra leads us to do, to meditate on emptiness from the form aggregates to all the way up to the enlightenment, qualities of the enlightenment, and do so, which is very useful. And then people who are not in that kind of position, just read the sutra. This is one of the most useful, helpful sutras to be read in this form, in this version, because some are extremely extensive, detailed, but this one is, in terms of the length, very not that long, but it captures all the important meanings. So we'll read this Heart Sutra. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling in the most virtuous mountain in Rajgir, together with great community of monks and great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was observed in concentration on the categories of phenomena. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aya Avalokiteshvara, look upon the very practice of profound professional wisdom, beheld those five aggregates also empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of the Buddha, the venerable Shariputra, said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aya Avalokiteshvara, said this to the lineage, which is to practice activities of profound professional wisdom. He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aya Avalokiteshvara, said this to the venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activities of profound professional wisdom should look upon like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. Line sense, feeling, discrimination, compensational factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compensational factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattva rely on and dwell in perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration, without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach and point to nirvana. All of Buddhas who dwell in three times also manifestly, completely awaken, unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra that equal to unequal, the mantra that totally pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of professional wisdom declare, Dayata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva should train profound professional wisdom like that. Then the Bhagwan rose from concentration, commended to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice profound professional wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagwan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aya Avalokiteshvara, those sounding in the entirety along the world's gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, who are overjoyed and highly praised by spoken by the Bhagwan. Oh yeah. So then in the same text, page 27, refuge and bodhicitta lines. And these 4 lines, refuge, first 2 lines are refuge. That is, reading these first 2 lines help us to hold the mind, taking refuge in the Buddha as one's own teacher, mentor, and taking refuge in the Dhamma as a means, methods to be applied, to be experienced, to be actualized within ourselves, and taking refuge in Sangha as one's own spiritual friends, supporters, that while we are in the spiritual journey. And holding this mind taking refuge in 3 jewels, not only this kind of occasion, but also in the morning, every morning, and during the day, every now and then, as a follower of the teachings of the Buddha, briefly recalling this mind, experiencing this mind is extremely helpful. So that is the first two lines. Then the last two lines, within the teachings of the Buddha, for some reasons, some of us follow the the Bodhisattva teachings, Mahayana teachings, and the essence of the following the Mahayana teachings, Bodhisattva teachings, is to enhancing, to to nurturing the bodhicitta, in Sanskrit, bodhicitta. It is translated in English as in several different versions, like the mind of enlightenment or the altruistic awakened mind. It is a mind which genuinely, sincerely cares, concerns well-beings of all living creatures. Not only cares and concerns of well-beings of all living beings, but that mind leads the individuals to act, to work for the well-beings of all living creatures. So holding that mind, bodhicitta, by reading the last two lines. And these two minds are as a main sort of intention, main reason being here to participate in these sessions. So we are going to read those 4 lines 3 times. Sanje cheta tsoje chonam la chanjo pado dane jaso che dage cheshe tibe tsonam di drola penje sanje droba sanje cheta tsoje chonam chanjo pado dane jaso che dage jenso gebe tsonam di dola penje sanje droba sanje cheda tsoje chona chanjo pado dane jaso che dage jenso gebe tsonam di dola penje sanje droba. Oh yeah, thank you. So these are the preparations for the class, and as I just said, it is useful to remind ourselves every now and then during the class, during the break time. We're here to to read this text, although the text itself deals with a particular topics that the historical Buddha taught in a very detail in many occasions, although that is the activities that we are going to do. But overall, us being here is, particularly here the people who have taken refuge, people who have already following the teachings of the Buddha, that is, those two mental states, mind taking refuge and the bodhicitta, are the main reasons being here. So to remind ourselves every now and then will be useful. Oh yeah. So the text that we are reading now, we reach the last part of the text. As you know, that we haven't started the text, and from right at the beginning, we start the text from the the middle of the text, and the text itself deals with the two, deals on this subject on emptiness from the two important Mahayana philosophical schools' point of view. The first part is mind-only school, Chittamatra school's view of emptiness, and the second half of the text deals with the emptiness from the middle way school, the Madhyamika school's the point of view of emptiness. So we start from there. Now we reach the last part of the text. And just to to remind ourselves, the topic, the subject matter that we are this text is dealing with, is this called emptiness, shunyata, in Sanskrit, and quite often translated in English as a emptiness. So it is according to the Buddha and subsequent those great teachers like Nagarjuna, it is a reality, emptiness as a reality or emptiness as a fact that we should realize, that we should understand. The things and events, all things and events, including our who we are, what we are, and what we experience in the past, at the present, and that we would like to experience in the future. All those things and events, including the universe where we live, and the building blocks of the universe, all things and events are in that nature of emptiness. Emptiness in the sense, they're all things and events, do not exist in and of themselves. In that sense, emptiness. They're all come into being. They're all come into existence, and the manner of their existence is thoroughly, completely dependent on many, many different, the factors. Nothing exists in and of itself, independently. What you call the inherently, intrinsically, and Buddha and subsequently Buddhist teachers, have found not realizing that nature, not seeing that nature, not knowing that nature, and not only not knowing, not seeing that nature, but very actively, perceiving and grasping completely opposite manner, the opposite nature, opposite from this, the emptiness nature of the all things and events, is a very serious problem, serious issue for the living beings. The living beings that, like ourselves, have a, strong, deep, notion or the yearning to be happy and to be free from any form of difficulties, any form of sufferings or dukkhas, and we try to achieve or to experience, the happiness and to relieve any form of, the shortcomings or the difficulties. And also we all have that potential. We all have the seeds to experience that genuine happiness and free from dukkha, suffering. Although that is the case, living beings, living creatures like ourselves, every now and then, we encounter difficulties. I'm talking about mainly the mental difficulties, fears, concerns, dissatisfactions, the sense of something is not correct, not enough, that kind of mental difficulties. And then, very obvious, very gross, physical difficulties, and so on and so forth. And the root of that difficulty, those difficulties that we experience, is very much within ourselves. Although external conditions contribute, us to experience these difficulties, but the Buddha and the subsequently Buddhist teachers have realized through their long-term observations, analysis, searching for the root of the difficulties that we experience, they found it is within, root is within ourselves. And that root is this, a very actively misapprehending, actively misbelieving, actively perceiving that things and events, all things and events, have that kind of nature, a nature of, some kind of intrinsic, inherent within, within themselves, what they are and who they are, pain, pleasure, joy, happiness, the individual identity, whatever, and then all external things and events. That belief, that believing that things and events have some form of the intrinsicness within themselves, what they are, is the root of the difficulties. And to get rid of that ignorance, that is, in the teachings of the Buddha, the term is used, that ignorance, that fundamental misbelief, misapprehension, and to get rid of that is again through, within ourselves, nurturing this wisdom realizing emptiness. And that is the purpose of why the historical Buddha, Gautama, taught, the many occasions on this subject, on this topic, on shunyata, on emptiness. And subsequent Buddhist teachers, Indian Buddhist masters like Nagarjuna and many, they have written sometimes as a commentary on the teachings of the Buddha, sometimes as their own, explanation on this topic, and then that traditions, that culture continues in Tibet, and this master, Geshe 14th century, he had written many important texts on this subject, and this is the text that we are reading. The Essence of True Eloquence is one of those important texts on this subject. So that is just people who are, the first time coming here, and just briefly, to say the text that we are reading. Oh yeah, and also why this subject matter is important. Now our reading is actually on people who don't have text. Don't worry, but there are some spare copies if you like to follow. Page 374 that we are going to read today. If not, you can share with others, and people who are first time, it might be not that easy, then don't worry that much. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So just briefly, because our reading start from the section that we started our last gathering in April. The last our weekend meeting, we started a little bit earlier than the chapter 7. Now, chapter 7, yeah. But also we continue chapter 7. And the chapter 7 as itself is titled saying the main reason for negation of ultimate status. That is on page 364. So this is the chapter that, the last chapter from this text. And the chapter itself is focused on, according to Tsongkhapa, based on mainly this great Indian master, Chandakirti, the 7th century Indian master, Chandakirti, and based on that great master, what kind of arguments, what kind of reasonings that they have, this dialecticist middle way school or consequential middle way school, Pasangika middle way school, apply to get rid of that wrong grasping, that grasping which I just mentioned, that misbelieving that things and events have some kind of intrinsic, inherent identity or reality. So what kind of arguments, what kind of reasoning that this consequential school or dialecticist middle way school prefer to use to really challenge that grasping or that misapprehension, because different masters, different Madhyamika school masters or different Madhyamika schools have different arguments they prefer to use to challenge that misapprehension to get rid of, in order to understand, in order to see, and in order to have that realization of emptiness. And that is the top chapter that we are looking at. And we finished in that chapter. Chapter itself, I think, has chapter itself has three main outlines, and out of the three main outlines, first outline is identifying, as you can see, description of the chief reasons. That's on page 364, and that's the first outlines. Second outline is how that main reasons, how those main reasons really eliminates that misapprehension. That's the second outline, which we are reading it under that outline. That is on page 366. 366, second outline, saying the process of refuting intrinsic identifiability thereby. So that is the meaning is it in the previous outlines, which I will not repeat, because we don't have time. Already did last month. If those are the main reasons under those pages, the Tsongkhapa have identified. These are the reasons, these are the arguments, main arguments that the consequential middle way schools like Chandakirti, the master, they prefer to use to argue, to really challenge that the misapprehension. So that is what this first outline. Then the second outline, page 366, that we are today that we are reading. Our reading is under that outline. If that is and if these are the reasons, and then how this belief, misbelief, misapprehension, the intrinsic identifiability, reality in the things and events, that misapprehension is what's called eliminated or challenged. And so that is the outline that we are reading today. And that outline has quite long, what's called explanations. And, the mainly what the Tsongkhapa has said, in Chandakirti, this great Indian master, he put forward in his teachings, among his teachings, here Tsongkhapa identified two texts. One is Madhyamika Avatara, Introduction to Middle Way, and audio commentary, his own commentary on that Introduction to Middle Way. In those two texts, Chandakirti put forward four consequences if you believe or if you assert the things and events have intrinsic identifiability reality or intrinsic reality in themselves. And those four consequences are, so we have finished first three consequences, and today's our reading will start from the fourth consequences. Now, just make it very, very clear what kind, why these four consequences are, explained by Chandakirti. Chandakirti explains in those two texts, if somebody, particularly those the people who are claiming the Madhyamika school, following Madhyamika schools, middle way schools' view on reality of the things and events, if you, on the one hand, if you assert you are following middle way school, Madhyamika school's view of emptiness, on the other hand, if you assert, if you believe that things and events have intrinsic reality, inherent reality, what they are, then there are these four consequences. So the four consequences. And then now our today's reading start from the fourth consequences, that is, as I mentioned earlier, page 374, in the right after that quotation, in the earlier part of that page, you can see the quotation. That quotation comes from this Indian great master Chandakirti, and that is related to the third consequence. Now our reading starts from the fourth consequence. And the fourth consequence is called, as you can see in that after the quotation, the paragraph which starts in the bracket, the fourth of the four exceptional reasonings is called the consequence of the wrongness of the scripture stated that things are empty by intrinsic reality. So you can see the fourth consequences is stated saying wrongness. So of course, the people who are not following the teachings of the Buddha, and even within the people who follow the teachings of the Buddha, who assert things and events have an intrinsic nature, for them, this argument will not going to work. They will say, so then what? But the fourth, the argument is very much, put forward, as I mentioned, people who, first of all, follow the teachings of the Buddha. Within the teachings of the Buddha, follow the Bodhisattva and the teachings. Within the following the teachings of the Bodhisattva, here is clearly to the middle way schools, not the mind-only school. Mind-only school, they assert things and events have an intrinsic nature. So this is clearly to that particular group. On the one hand, claiming, saying middle way school, holding the view of the middle way school, Madhyamika school view, and then on the other hand, one way or another asserting there's some kind of intrinsic reality or intrinsic nature. And this is what here this last consequence is put forward. So now, because as the title of the fourth consequence is called spiritual and scriptural, scriptural statement. So, what kind of scriptural statement is talking about? That statement mentioned that things and events do not have intrinsic reality or intrinsic nature, in themselves, in and of themselves. What kind of scripture? And this is the scripture which here, quoted. But it is quoted in a much longer version in the Chandakirti, this great Indian master who put forward these four consequences if somebody assert in this particular, in this particular setting, who assert things and events have an intrinsic nature, and where the Chandakirti, put those four consequences for, in that commentary, Chandakirti's auto commentary, the sutra is stated quite a chunk of that sutra. But here, what Geshe has done, instead of quoting entire the sutra, it is quoted more, the shorter version. So now, among that sutra, that particular chapter, Kashyapa, in Tibetan, Wusung. Wusung was one of the main direct disciple of the Buddha, the historical Buddha. One of the, in terms of the ranking, elders, the disciple, close disciple. So sometimes, the chapter, particular text is called that person's chapter, that person's text, because, the Buddha taught that particular topic, that particular chapter, out of that person's asking question. And this is what, how this one is. So one of the few important points here in this quotation, of course, we can't go one by one. Under that quotation, if you look at in the third line, which is the important one, which is very related to the topic that we are reading it says in the third line in the quotation, it's the very things themselves are emptiness. So that is what this sutra repeated again and again in a many different relation to many different things. Now, if you look at the end of that quotation, which is saying, very things themselves are signlessness. The very things themselves are, the non-occurrence, and and wishlessness. There are other things. So some of you may recall. When we are reading this text, the essence of true eloquence. The very, very beginning of the text, we read that not the Chidamardhan section, but at the beginning of the text. 동바 시오 깨와 매베스 미시바네 로와 참줄바 대다 투정하게 탑주다 리바자라케네 주바세. So the saying the historical Buddha, out of great sort of loving kindness, compassion towards all living beings, and them to living beings to be free from the suffering and the origins of suffering through many hundreds of reasonings, hundreds of arguments, to explain them. The things and events are emptiness, to understand that nature, and in that context, the Buddha taught emptiness in what normally called 3 doors of liberation. 3 doors of liberation, and 3 doors of liberation is emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness. Those are the 3 doors of liberation. The first, which is called emptiness, that is talking about things and events, their nature, themselves. Themselves are emptiness, empty of inherently existence. And signlessness, then it is talking about the causes and conditions that brings the existence of the things and events. Those causes and conditions, they are also empty of inherent existence, and that is signlessness. And wishlessness, the results of the things and events, whether they are positive, whether they are negative, whether they are good or bad, pain or pleasure, the result of the things and events, whether they are animate or inanimate, whatever. But results of the things and events are also that nature of emptiness, and that is called wishlessness. So okay, I'll read that verse because I've got the text. The way is emptiness. This is coming from the sutra. The way is emptiness, peaceful and uncreated, and which here they're talking about the emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness. Not knowing in that nature, those 3 natures, those 3 things in those 3 that nature, not knowing that, the living beings wander. That means in samsara, in cyclic existence. Moved by compassion, he introduces them with hundreds of reasons and technical procedures. This is how he translated. So in other words, as I mentioned, the historical Buddha taught emptiness, for that reason. Not something pure philosophy, not something pure, what's called, concepts toward this nature, the nature of emptiness, to the living beings, seeing the living beings in this kind of predicament, in this kind of samsaric predicament where we are, and so to overcome that kind of situation, then he taught emptiness. And emptiness is taught in these three ways. The nature of the things in event themselves are also empty. That's the first one. The causes and conditions of the things and events, they are also empty, and therefore signlessness. And the result of the causes and result of those things and events, they are also empty, therefore wishlessness. So that is something which so in this sutra that we saw the brief quotation on page 374, deals with emptiness in that fashion, but also there are more detail. But emptiness here, it is clearly stated, the very things themselves are, the sightlessness, wishlessness, emptiness, and that is in the essence, the emptiness, not something from outside, something other than themselves, something, not being that, not in that. They themselves, the table being, the table, being absence, the table being, the absence or empty of table from its own right, from its own side. And that is what the meaning of what he has said, very things themselves are empty. Emptiness, not from something, but from itself. Table being, as a table, not from its own right, not from its own side, so that is what here, so this is what this, so that is so saying, so sutras, scriptures have stated like that. So as if you believe, if you assert things and events have some form of intrinsic, inherent entity, then you have difficulty to how to explain the meaning of these sutras, and that is this actual meaning of this actual point of this. This part, this fourth consequences. But what Tsongkhapa has done here, he has done here a little bit more detailed explanation. He dealt with this in two stages. The first stage is very much, as I mentioned earlier, and the within the Mahayana teaching, within the follower of the Bodhisattva teachings, who assert they are follower of the Bodhisattva teaching, but still assert intrinsic reality in the things and events. He have one argument that half of this. Then the second part of this, in this section, he argues at his own time, contemporary some of the Tibetan teachers, or maybe a little bit earlier, 200 or 300 years earlier than Tsongkhapa's time, some of the Tibetan teachers' view of middle way school. What is emptiness? Shunyata, the meaning of the shunyata, the meaning of the Panchaparamita Sutra. And he argues with their assertion. So there are two parts. And the first part starts from this page 375, after the 74, after the quotation, where paragraph starts saying Chandra. And that goes to all the way page 375, which ends that paragraph. That's quite a big paragraph. And this one deals with the two Mahayana schools. The first deals with the Chittamatra school, the mind-only schools, because mind-only school asserts believes, things and events have an intrinsic nature, inherent nature, to argue them how you are going to explain the meaning of this sutra. Then another group, Geshe Tashi deals with this based on Chandakirti, like the Bhavavika, but the Madhyamika school master, those autonomous or the dogmaticist Madhyamika school's master, like Bhavavika, the Shankarakshita, Kamalashila, who also assert some form of intrinsic nature, and this we all have many times during reading this text, who assert this. So this, this first part is really very much reflecting, or Geshe Tashi is arguing to those masters. So now I have just brief explanation. Look at a little bit detail on this section. So the another some kind of summary in the out of those two sections in this our present reading. The main argument is the ultimate nature of the things and events. Ultimate nature of the things and events, or emptiness nature of the things and events is, this empty or empty of intrinsic, inherent reality, or here the translator translated intrinsic identifiability reality, the intrinsic empty of intrinsic. That is the final mode of, what's called the final mode of things and events. Other than any other, like the mind-only school's version of emptiness, or the the Bhavavika, that the autonomous Madhyamika school's version of emptiness, although these version of emptiness may help, may reduce certain levels of this misapprehension of the things and events, but they cannot reduce, they cannot eliminate completely, fully from the root of this misapprehension or this grasping. Therefore, the final mode of the reality of the things and events, the ultimate nature of the things and events, is absence of that intrinsically identifiable nature or the entity in the things and events. That empty of that, absence of that, is the final mode. And this is what here we will see now in our reading, a little bit detail here. Okay. I will not read it. So now if you look at your page 375 from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, line 4, in short. So just look at from there, and this will give us very clear what is the main argument to say, this kind of version, the intrinsically absence or empty of intrinsic reality is the final mode of the things and events. And the argument here is under this, when it says in short, 도드나 랑기치니 도드나 랑문에 동배 랑동당 랑동게 ten. So it says this: in short, intrinsic identifiability of things would mean that there's no self-emptiness, which is emptiness by things own nature. Therefore, if one does not ascend, do you follow with me where I'm reading? 375 and line 4. That's where I'm reading. Is emptiness by things own nature. Therefore, if one does not ascend to the emptiness of the things with respect to the intrinsic reality, which is intrinsic identifiability, though one may call it self-empty, does not get beyond other emptiness. So this is really very much dealing with people who, this is the first part of the arguments, people who, even though they may say emptiness in the sense, something empty of something, but as long as they assert, as long as they are unable to understand and unable to explain this absence of intrinsic reality, inherent reality in the things and events, even though verbally they may use the term emptiness and even the self-empty, but in reality, their notion of emptiness, their understanding of emptiness is not the emptiness which the sutra is talking about, that is empty of inherent nature or empty of intrinsic nature. Then the next one here is saying the Chandakiti, that means the idealist, that means the mind-only school. The idealist doctrine that relative, that is the out of the three natures, other power nature, relative here that he used. The relative is free of substantial subject-object dichotomy. So in other words, the version of emptiness according to the mind-only schools, that is, the absence or empty of subject-object duality. Here, the dichotomy, that substantial subject-object dichotomy. In other words, absence or empty of that the subject-object duality, subjective, not subjective and objective duality, absence of that is, according to the middle school, mind-only school, that is the emptiness. And what the Chandakiti is saying, that version of emptiness, although it may help to reduce the, what's called the grasping, that kind of misapprehension, but it is not the, what is sutra, this sutra is talking about. It says it does not negate intrinsic identifiability by taking the import of the relative, that is the, the other power nature, to be intrinsic reality-lessness. So the argument here, the argument is very much to those traditional, traditional in the sense already existed in India, like the Bhavaveka, and in this case, mind-only school. Their version of emptiness is not what this sutra is talking about. And that's the first part. And this will come a little bit later also in the second part, later part, also there's further argument. So then the next paragraph which says, although the various positions on the subtle subjective selflessness are similar insofar as, now this one is quite important or useful to look at a little bit here again. When it says, this is under his bracket, the translators, the actual Tsongkhapa word is, although they are similar insofar as there are modes of emptiness where the negation ground does not exist as actuality of the negatee. That's the one part. So in other words, saying mind-only school and the other schools, almost all the these Buddhist schools, and what is similar in this area, they all say, now need to think it a little bit detail. Here the term he used is negation base in the line 2, negation base. In that paragraph, line 2, end of that line 2, he used negation base. You can use basis of negation, basis of negation, or he used negation ground, you say basis of negation. So in this case, our conversation, I will use the table. Table is basis of negation. The intrinsic or inherent, according to this school, is negated or absent, proved to be absent. The intrinsic reality, inherent reality is proved, is absence, is absence in this relation to this table. Relation to this table. So this table is basis of the negation, basis of the negation. And what in this particular school, the Madhyamika Pasangika, what they negate intrinsic, inherent nature with this relation to this table. In other words, saying table does not exist. Table is not intrinsic, inherent entity, and therefore the table is basis of negation. So in that kind of concept, the basis of negation is what is not negated. What is not negated in this, what is negated is intrinsic, inherent nature. Intrinsic, inherent nature is negated relation to this table, which is the basis of the negation, because table is not intrinsic, inherent. So that is how how the argument is, the basis of argument is set. In that sort of setting is same. All the mind-only school also say the same. The Madhyamika autonomous or the dogmaticist school also say the same. What is different is what is negated is different. Mind-only school, what is negated in the other power nature, or on the relation to the table, what is negated, mind-only school, the negation is the absence, or negation is the subject and object duality. That is negated. That is mind-only school. And the autonomous schools, what is negated according to their version, because that's quite long, I can't say that. So what this part is saying is, this part of the text is important. What Tsongkhapa is saying, all these schools, setting the argument is the same. The basis of negation and what is negated. The meaning of negation means the basis of negation is not what is negated. That is the same in that sense, and this is what this part of the text is talking about. It says similar insofar as there are modes of emptiness where the negation ground does not exist, actuality of the negatee. That's what the mind-only school will say. Table is absence of that duality, duality of subjective and objective. Same as this consequential school will say, table is absence of intrinsic reality. Although negation is different, but setting argument is the same. I'm not saying argument is same, but how to structure the argument is the same. And that's what this is saying. Then it says, now follow the next end, where the ground is empty with respect to the negative, only the emptiness of things with respect to intrinsic identifiability means their emptiness in their own right. So now this is then the difference. The difference in this school, Madhyamika, the consequential Madhyamika school, the difference here is empty of intrinsic, which other school will not say that. And mind-only school not say that. What's called the autonomous Madhyamika school will not say that. Now then comes the reasons why this one, why the Madhyamika Pasangika view is the profound one or the final one. Then it comes this coming reading, and these coming readings are not that easy, but it is a very important one, which start from the next line, next two lines, below the next two lines, and says, the reason is that why this school's version of emptiness, which is empty of intrinsic reality, is the final mode. And now it's, as I said, it will come, and this is what here. First, I want to give you, before I read this, I want to give you an example. And this example may help us to understand this part that we are going to read. Example is this. When somebody is very, very angry. Somebody is very angry to a person A. Somebody is very angry to a person A, and then somebody, his or her friend, try to help to that person who is very angry towards person A, to say the person C is very kind, very gentle, very patient, and think about that. Will that help this person's angry towards person A, that anger? It will not help, because there's no connection. Although, there's some sort of connection, because his anger and this person, his friends telling the person C has a very gentle, very kind, very, that kind of nature, may have some kind of connection, but it is not directly helping to reduce his anger towards person A. So take that as an example. And this is coming the lines that what Geshe Tashi is explaining. The language is quite difficult, even in Tibetan it's quite difficult, but the meaning is this. Madhyamika said, first take this, mind-only school's version of emptiness. The absence of subject and object duality. That understanding is very, very helpful to reduce many graspings, that kind of misapprehensions. So while somebody who is in, say, in the meditation, or say that kind of understanding, mind-only school's version of that emptiness of absent and emptiness of subject and object duality, that mind is fully in function, fully in function. During that period, although that realization's full function, still, there's a possibility, there's a chance, there's a room that person still have some form of grasping. Some form of grasping is still room to left, some form of grasping to be occurred in that person during that time of when he or she was realizing that absence of subject-object duality. Same as the autonomous, like what you call the Bhavavika, the Shankarakshita, their version of emptiness. That mental state is full function, full in operation, still leaves some room, to occur grasping, So that is what Geshe is saying, based on Chandakirti. That is the sign. Their version of emptiness are not the final version of emptiness, because their reason is, while those two versions of understanding of minds are still in function, but still leaves some room to have grasping. The final mode, if these two understanding of emptiness were the final mode of the things and events, the ultimate nature of the things and events, then while these two realizations are in full function, full operation, wouldn't have chance any kind of grasping to be occurred. But that's not the case. And this is what these coming, what you call the lines, these lines which start from saying, the reason is that with the former type of emptiness, that is those two, mind-only school and the Madhyamika Sautantika's version of emptiness, as long as there's no loss of concentration, which I use the same, the full function, full operation, realization is full operation, no loss of concentration on the perceiving attained, the establishment by validating cognition. Are you saying realizing their version of emptiness? This is more details in validating cognition. It is impossible for verification. Verification, I use that term saying grasping. The grasping, I use the term. Here the term is verification to occur, which under the influence of theories. Under the influence of theories, in the sense philosophical, under the influence of the philosophy that you encounter, and so forth. So that's what hold the ground as truly existent, or exist in a way tantamount to that. So the meaning, now then read the next one. Whereas, even when the latter, idealists and the dogmatic system, do not lose the establishment of validating cognition of their objectives, this does not prevent ratification holding theoretically to existence in truth or in something with a meaning of truth. So I have given you the meaning. This is very long, the paragraph, long sort of paragraph. Meaning is that, the version with this school, the consequential school version of emptiness, which is intrinsic, absence of intrinsic, inherent, is the final mode or is the ultimate truth, because as long as somebody who realizes, understand that form of emptiness, empty of intrinsic or empty of inherent, then while that realization is in full function, full operation, it will not give any chance to any grasping to occur. And that is the sign of that version of emptiness is the final. Whereas middle way school, mind-only school, and the other version of emptiness, although they may reduce some form of grasping, while those realizations are in full operation, but still leaves some room to have the true grasping, the intrinsic grasping, and these grasping will bring other afflictions. Therefore, those are not the final mode. And this is some of the most important part of this section that we are reading now. Okay, now is tea time. Yeah. We'll come back at 12. Now you can see people who are first time today, that I warned you earlier. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So this session, we will start with a brief silent meditation. Do a short meditation because in the previous session we didn't do the meditation. So we'll do just about 6 to 7 minutes silent meditation, simply to enhance, to nurture a calm, clear, and focused mind. And it can be done simply, focusing on your natural breathing, or just, staying to the present moment, right here and now, then raising the awareness. So we'll do a brief silent meditation. So we just roughly covered the out of the four consequences, not asserting that type of emptiness, intrinsic, inherent nature, empty of intrinsic or inherent nature in the things and events. So, we just covered that, the last consequences out of the four consequences. Now we are going to move to the third outline, that is on page 376. Page 376. So under this outline, as you can see the outline itself, this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the previous session, the entire chapter is dealing with what are the main arguments, what are the main reasons that the consequential or the dogmaticist Madhyamika school prefer to use to argue their version of emptiness, and to argue their version of how the object of negation is negated. And that is the whole chapter. And this third outline under that chapter is again part of that argument. As you can see the outline, it's saying consideration of whether there is a propendum in the negation, intrinsic realitylessness. So the term propendum, that might be, for some of you, might be quite new. It is the term refers to when we set the arguments, to, on the one hand, to prove emptiness of selflessness, emptiness of intrinsic reality in the things and events, or the same sort of arguments to reject any form of intrinsic inherent entity in the things and events. I mean, these two are two sides of the same coin. But when we set our arguments, and there is always thesis, the thesis or the propendum, here the term is used. Thesis is, in the argument, say the formally structured argument, there is a subject, there is a predicate, there is a reasons or the arguments, and there is the example. So there are four components, subject, predicate, reasons, and the examples. So the propendum is the combination of the subject and the predicate. Take this example. Say the form aggregate, that is the subject, is empty of inherently existent, that is the predicate, because it is dependently arising. Put it that as an example. That is the reasons, like, say for example, the mirage, or mirage. Just use that as an example. So this propendum is referring to, in this case, the form aggregates empty of inherently existence. That is the propendum. That is the the thesis. That is what this argument is trying to prove. This reason is trying to prove, and that is the propendum. That is the prebendum. So now this section under this outline is, that again, mainly Je Tsongkhapa is arguing, discussing to either contemporary his time Tibetan scholars, or prior to his time, some of the earlier Tibetan scholars on this, on this topic. The main argument, or the conversation, or the arguments that are, one of the main arguments is this, saying that this kind of arguments, logical statements, yes, this statement can prove form aggregate is empty of inherently existence, or that proof in the sense rejects or eliminates any kinds of intrinsic or any trace of intrinsic reality in the form aggregates. But this argument does not prove anything. It just simply rejects. It just simply refutes. The what you call the existent. In this case, our example is form aggregate is absence of inherent existence. It just simply rejects inherent or intrinsic reality, but it does not prove form aggregate is empty of inherently existence. And that is one of the assertions, some of the contemporary of Je Tsongkhapa or some of the earlier. So in other words, it simply rejects intrinsic reality. It does not prove absence of intrinsic reality. And that is, why they're saying that, why they're asserting that, they have some reasons, the reasons, and also they have some, the sources traced back to some of the Nagarjuna's texts, some of the other great Indian masters' texts. And based on that, saying that, the consequential schools, the dogmaticist, Madhyamika Prasangika schools, arguments to reject. Any arguments are simply to reject any form of intrinsic reality in the things in events, but arguments are not to prove any kind of that kind of emptiness. And that is here, this, it says that the title, it says, consideration of whether there is a prebendum. Prebendum in the sense, is there any, in that kind of argument, is there something to be proved as a thesis? And that is the argument. So we will see this, the coming our reading. Yeah. So what Je Tsongkhapa has done in here, on the concept of in so look at the first paragraph, which is like more like the raising the questions. Here, one may wonder: does the reason merely negate intrinsic reality in persons and things? As you know, why the term is used, persons and things. When one asserts that it is not established in the sense, that it is not proved, not the reasons, arguments are not to prove that these are absent. It is simply just to reject the intrinsic reality. Or does the reason actually prove intrinsic realitylessness? So that is the the question which covers all this section. Now look at the next paragraph, the answer. In this regard, since it is first of all necessary to understand definition of the two kinds of negation. Two kinds of negation. So now, here we will, you will see a little bit detail on this. Two kinds of negation. Gakpa in Tibetan. There are two kinds of negation, and the translations are slightly different here. Commonly, first of all, in Tibetan, megak in Tibetan, and in the past, the term is used saying non-affirming negation, megak. And the second one is in Tibetan, mayingak, and that is affirming negation. That is, in the past, that is how it is used. But this translator, the common, the present text translator, use slightly different terms. He used the term, the first one, he used saying exclusive negation. That is, earlier I used non-affirming negation, and here he used term exclusive negation. And the second one he used here saying choice negation, choose or choice? Choice negation. Which one is it? Choice negation. So that is the commonly translated affirming negation. Now, this is to do with, when our language, when our conceptual thought interact with the reality, interact with the things and events, our language and our conceptual minds, conceptual thoughts. When these two, either language express the things and events, or the conceptual minds, understands or apprehends the things and events, there are two ways. One is in Tibetan, duba, that means affirming, duba, and the other one is gakpa, negation. And now what we are looking at here is the second one, negation. For example, when I say table, when I use this language, table, that is affirming language. When my mind when I thought my thought, not the direct perception. Direct perception doesn't need that, doesn't interact the reality, their object with this kind of negation things. But when my conceptual thought, thinking table, I've been in my room, and again, just when my thought think table, in the room, that is again affirming. But if I think, or my language use saying, they're saying non-table. If I say non-table, or if I say, non-table, then the language turn into negative, negation, non-table. Or if I think, again, conceptually, think something non-table back in my room, that is, again, the negative. So the duba, the positive, gakpa, negative. And this negative has these two, the affirmative negation and non-affirmative negation. Gakpa the duba, mayinga the manga. So now it is come down to the this negation. I will not talk this, positive. That's different. Now the negative, and negative has two in this case, those two, affirmative and non-affirmative negation, negative or negation. So it is purely to do with the language and the thoughts, conceptual thoughts. When the language and conceptual thoughts turn into, the negative not in a, what you call the, virtues and non-virtues, moral and immoral, not in that sense. When the language and thought interacts, their objects, interact with through negation, then it is become what you call the negative. So then, therefore, there are two ways to engage, and one is non-affirmative. So what does it mean, non-affirmative? Non-affirmative, I will say a little bit in here, then we'll read the text. Non-affirmative, is that one first? Yeah. Or what he used, exclusive negation, non-affirmative negation. What does that mean? When the the language is used, when the language is used, as I said, absence of Tashi, or Tashi not exist, or Tashi, absence of Tashi not exist. When that language is used, that language tells us only the absence of Tashi. It doesn't tell us anything other than that absence of Tashi. It doesn't tell us Tashi is outside. It doesn't tell us Tashi is gone. Nothing. It only tells us that absence. And that is non-affirmative negation in terms of the language. And the same like the thoughts, conceptual thoughts. Certain conceptual thoughts, when it apprehends its object, it apprehends only what is absence, what is negated. When I think absence of elephant in this room, that thought, what it has is only the absence of elephant. It doesn't have other than, it doesn't indicate, it doesn't sort of tell us other than that absence. That is non-affirmative, the negation thoughts. But the language as well as thought to be non-affirmative, the sort of manner to engage with their object, the language and thought doesn't need to be like the absence. It doesn't need to be that kind of word, absence or empty or the lack, doesn't need to be. It is perfectly possible. There isn't any kind of what you call that kind of words, explicit word, but language and the thoughts, when they apprehend, when they express their object, they express their object through directly negating what is not. Without any particular words, like absence, which I used earlier, empty or absence or not, isn't, not using any of these negative language, or mind itself not thinking in that sort of things. But in order to apprehend their object, language to express that object, the conceptual thought to apprehend that object, has to be go through the process of negating what is not. Otherwise, unable to language to express that, and unable to apprehend thought that. So there are that kind of way to our language and thoughts operates, what you call with their objects, and that they are called non-affirmative negation, which we will look at a little bit in detail in the text with the example, make it. But another way, what you call the language and the thought, which is when they operate, this other one, affirming negation. Affirming negation. Still through negative language, but when we use that language, when the conceptual thought, they engage with their object, and what is expressed, what is taught, it indicates something other than what is expressed. The traditional example that we will see a little bit later, it is said this, the Brahmin who is very, very sort of tsumbu, very sort of, big belly and very, very gracious, very, vibrant, very healthy, is not eating during the day. So that is the expression. The Brahmin who is very healthy, very big belly, but he doesn't eat during the day. If I express that expression, generally speaking, grown-up people will understand. Okay, he's very, healthy, very big belly, and very vibrant, and so on and so forth. But he doesn't eat during the day. That means he's eating in the evening, night. That's only to either day or in the evening. That indicates. So there's something. The language is negative. Say, he doesn't eat during the day. And that really indicates something, what is expressed. Say, he eats at night. Yeah. So this is called affirmative negation. And it's similar to that in our thought, got into process to understand certain things. And through the negating certain things, then understand what is negated, then it indicates something other than what is what is negated. So that is called affirmative negation. So why Tsongkhapa is going through this explanation, next few paragraphs, it is very important, for Chandakirti, and for, then Tsongkhapa is following the Chandakirti's footstep to talk about the predicate and probandum. Probandum is the thesis, as I mentioned earlier, the thesis of these arguments to prove the emptiness of the Madhyamika Pasangaka version of emptiness, to prove that thesis is negative, but out of the two negatives, it is non-affirmative negatives. It is not affirmative negatives. It's only, says it is absence. When the individual, through these kind of reasons, try to prove the thesis, what the individual understanding, under the reason, what understands that absence. Nothing indicates behind that absence. Therefore, to say that is affirmative negatives. Why it's so important? It goes down to the ultimate nature of the truth. Ultimate nature of the truth. Out of the two truths, conventional truth and the ultimate truth of the things and events. Ultimate nature of the truth is just simply that absence of intrinsic, absence of inherent, nothing other than that absence. That is how it, that the main sort of all these long arguments are for that reason. If something indicates from that probandum other than that absence, then the ultimate truth is not ultimate. There's something other than that. As soon as if you say that is the ultimate truth, if you say that is the final mode of the existence of the things and events, on the one hand you say that, but same time you say those arguments to prove that has something indicates other than the absence, then that is not the ultimate. It is not the final. That's the one reason. Another reason is, the second one is more experiential reason. Experiential reason is this: when practitioners enter into meditative equipoise on emptiness, during that meditative equipoise, what is experienced, what is realized by these people during that meditative equipoise, they realize, they experience only that absence, nothing, the absence of intrinsic, inherent reality. Nothing. If there's something, they should experience that, but they do not experience other than that absence. So from the experiential point of view, ultimate nature is, ultimate truth is just that absence of intrinsic reality, because these meditative equipoise, these realizations tells us that's the case. And from the theoretical point of view, this arguments to prove the emptiness. If these arguments in the probandum, when the person realizes his or her thesis, understand his or her thesis, under that understanding, if there's something indicates, then that is not ultimate. Therefore, so these are the two reasons which it is important. So in this text we saw earlier some of these points, but in here Geshe has repeated and in certain extent gone through quite a detail on this topic, the topic of what's called the negative, and within the negative, those two kinds of negative that we have just mentioned. Now just look at the text itself. So I'm reading on page 376 in the second paragraph, which we just briefly started. Now it will be clear what we are reading. In this regard, since it is first of all necessary to understand the definition of the two kinds of negation, let us explain them. So the two kinds of negation we know now. When a negation is verbally expressed in a language, it either excludes its negatee explicitly in words, or else, not necessarily explicitly excludes, else may be understood as a functioning effectively to negate its negatee when it dawns in the cognition through its implication. So now here is given two examples, which I briefly mentioned earlier. So now look at the examples. An example, the first of the first mode is selflessness. In Tibetan now, dangme. Dak is self, me is absence, empty. In English here, selflessness, or you can another term that is no self. If you say no self, that is language itself express the negative. What is absence? No self. Yeah, and also the mind thought, also go through that. Now, the second one, the second is ultimate truth. So when you express this language in English, ultimate truth, that doesn't express, that statement doesn't say anything absence or anything empty or anything negative. It says ultimate truth. Or another term is suchness, thusness. These all are, similar to the ultimate truth. But all these statements haven't got any negative sort of words. But these are same although the doesn't express that, but it has the same meaning, same sort of reality as the selflessness, emptiness. Although language is not in the expression, there's no negative word. So as I mentioned earlier, in the first non-affirmative negative negation, can be expressed by language, but not necessarily expressed by language. Whether it's expressed a negative, some kind of negative words expressed or not, but thought and language, to understand that, it has to go through negating. In this case, for example, somebody who say, I want to realize ultimate truth, and have that yearning, yearning to understand ultimate truth. That mind, that conceptual mind, to understand the ultimate truth without rejecting, without refuting any form of intrinsic, any form of inherent nature, said, I want to understand ultimate truth of the table, ultimate truth of the I, ultimate truth of my feeling. So he or she mentally to understand the ultimate truth of his body. Although the language sounds positive, there's no negative words, the expression, but to understand that within his mental process, without negating or without refuting, rejecting, any form of intrinsic, inherent entity relation to his body, he or she will not have the understanding of ultimate truth of his or her body. So that is the meaning of has to go through, even though there's no negative words, negative, the sort of expression. But when the mind, or in the language, saying the table has a two nature of the reality, conventional nature of the truth and the ultimate nature of the truth. Now, you need to explain ultimate nature of the truth without expressing that absence of intrinsic reality. You cannot explain the ultimate nature of the table, ultimate truth of the table. So this is what here, this first part is, what it is explaining in here. Okay. Okay. Now I will not go any detail on that. So you can look at which, although it's excluding, I'm reading the same paragraph, end of that paragraph, excluding the negati is not verbally explicit, functioning effectively to exclude the mental fabrication. That this term mental fabrication, the mental fabrication in the sense, the believing relation to my earlier example, me believing my body has some form of intrinsic inherent as a body, that is mental fabrication. That is, here the term is used, mental fabrication. Mental turba in Tibetan. So without rejecting, without refuting, without negating that kind of mental fabrication, even if I want to understand using that ultimate truth of my body, I cannot have, my mind cannot have access to the ultimate truth of my body without rejecting that. That's what this is what this part is. Thus, the negation is what is understood when a negatee is directly excluded. So that is the first one out of the two negation. Now, the first of the two kind of either explicit or implicit or explicit negation is the choose negation, that is affirmative negation, which I briefly mentioned earlier. And this one is really, it is quite interesting. It is quite interesting if you look at how Geshe really structures his explanation, his arguments. Of course, when he explains, when he argues the emptiness itself, or ultimate truth of the ultimate truth, then his explanation is closely based on Chandakirti's texts. But when it comes to, when he needs to explain not necessarily relation to the emptiness, but some of the other important things, then he has no difficulties to use some other Indian masters, like in this case, Bhavavika. Geshe does not agree with the Bhavavika as far as Bhavavika's view of emptiness is concerned. Geshe disagrees with Bhavavika's version of emptiness, or Shankarakshita's version of emptiness. But when it comes to explain some other points that he agrees with, the Bhavavika, he easily comes and explains and quotes. And this is one here we will see, the Bhavavikas. In the past, we saw many times, the Bhavavikas, this important text, Blaze of Arguments. And in this text, the Bhavavika sets those two kinds of negations, and here he translated saying, choose negation, and exclusion negation. So you read this, I will not read one by one. What is useful here is, what's that one? Okay. Okay. Now here in the text, Bhavavika's text, this out of the two negations, I will use the term that I'm quite familiar with, non-affirmative negation and affirming negation. Non-affirming negation and affirming negation. So when it comes to affirming negation, which is the second one, then again Bhavavika gives within that there are four different kinds, four different types, within the affirming negations. So these are very much to do with the language and with the conceptual thoughts. When the language and conceptual thoughts interact with the things and events, the manner of interaction, not only affirming the positive language, positive expression, but also in a negative expression. Within that negative expression, there are many different ways. And so far we saw two, non-affirming and affirming negation. And then affirming negation itself, here, the Bhava gives only 4, but in some other texts, I think it's also, I think Bhava another text, which is commentary on Avalokita's Generis Tushu. One of the another Bhava texts gave 18 different non-affirming, negations. So these all are really to do with the language, usage of language. I will not go one by one. If you look at in next page, there's one. Here he gives 4, I think. Yeah. Bhava explains argument negation. It's not. Yeah. So it's, if you look at in the page connection to the page 376 and 377, you will see all those nice examples. There are 4 examples, the 4 possibilities and 4 examples. One thing which is important here is what Tsongkhapa has done. He gave us a little bit explanation from the from the usage of the term. Implies, the does not implies, in which you will see in the Bhava text. What does that mean? Implies. I used earlier indicates. So here the term is used implies and not does not implies. So does not implies, as I said, Tashi is not here. That language does not implies anything, other than absence of Tashi. And here the Tsongkhapa gives us, the usage of what's the meaning in Tibetan. Pemba tam me pemba. Pemba implies. Me pemba does not implies. So the Tsongkhapa gives a little bit, explanation behind that. And those are something useful. Then look at in the next paragraph, same page 377. Here the difference between the 2 types is not that they using the the words is not and exists not. So this is again. It may not work in the Tibetan English because we are using different language, but here is talking relation to the Tibetan language. In the Tibetan language, mayin, me. Me is just simply, it's saying, does what here translated saying, exists not, me jeba, me. That is, exists not here translated. Mayin, it means is not. So what is Tsongkhapa here that going through more detail? In the Tibetan word, even if there's does not, exists not. Even if there's that kind of exists not word is present, but it's not necessarily that expression or that language or that expression, not necessarily non-affirming what you call the negation. Even though it has just simply saying exists not, or a word is saying is not, even though it's in Tibetan mayin is not, but it's again not necessarily that is affirming negation. And he gives us some examples these are to do with the language. It may not work in English, but but similar things may have in English. So here, Tsongkhapa gave us 2 examples, and a little bit later, look at this. Boundless life. Boundless life in Tibetan, tse pak, me. Ce is, the what you call the life, or life or the what they call, life, and pak is pak me is boundless, pak me. So this word, it has a me, it has a me, but that is not saying the non-affirming negation. And there's another term is given, but it is not non-affirming negation, it is affirming negation, that word. There's another example is given. Savame. Where's that one? Anyway, so quite nice to read this part to give us the general Buddhist concept of the language and the thought operation, and under the operation of language and thought, to explaining the things and events, how the manner of their existence, and the manner of how our minds, our conceptual thoughts, and how our language really sort of interact with those things and events. So these are the just first part of the Chöshin Pinzu Chirat Shebya. So now I want to finish this a little bit further. Okay, I will not read all this. So then if you look at your page a little bit down there, I said there are 4 kinds of this affirming negation. The last paragraph in page 377, you will see those 4 kinds of negation. 4 kinds of negation. So I will not read all those things. Okay. Now say we will cover it up to page 378, end of the first paragraph. So when we come back, when we come back after lunch, we'll start from page 378, the paragraph which starts now from that paragraph. So all these, page 376, 77, and a little bit in 78, these are the general explanation about the negation, about the negative negation. So then the actual the explanation on this subject, on this under this outline, start from this after lunch, that from our reading. Oh yeah, it's now lunchtime. Food offering. Omo ahong, omo ahong, omo ahong. To the precious Buddha, peerless guide, to the precious Dharma, peerless refuge, to the precious Sangha, peerless liberators, we offer to 3 jewels of refuge, this food with 100 flowers, attractive and well prepared, is offered to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas with devotion. May all beings enjoy wealth of food of concentration, seeing these foods as medicine without attachment or hatred, not arrogance, pride, wish, impulsive body, only to sustain the body. Oh yeah.